This is J. Krishnamurti's 7th public talk in Saanen, 1964.
I would like to continue where we left off the other day. I think it is very important to understand the whole question of action. We are using that word not in any abstract sense, not as an idea, but the actual fact of action, of doing something. The very doing of something, whether you dig in a garden, go to the office, look at a tree, or follow the movement of a river, or just walking along on a road quietly, without thought and but observing. All that is part of action. And with most of us, action breeds conflict. It becomes repetitive. And every activity, however profound or however superficial, when repeated, becomes tiresome, boring, and without much significance. So, I think it's very important to understand what is action. To do anything, to walk from that corner to this, to speak, to look, to think, to feel, everything demands energy. And energy is dissipated when there is inherent in that expression of that energy conflict. And as we observe all our activities at whatever level engenders some kind of conflict, some kind of effort, resistance, a denial and an acceptance, which creates within one a sense of resistance, conflict, and defense. And is it at all possible to act without any form, without any conflict, resistance, and even without effort? That's what I would like this morning to talk about, if I may. One sees what is happening in the world. The computers, the electronic brains, automation, and various forms of mechanical activities are going to give man more and more leisure. Whether that leisure is in the east or in the west, it is still leisure. And that leisure is going to be monopolized by religions, organized religions, and by organized entertainment. I do not know if there is much difference between organized religion and organized entertainment. but for the moment we'll keep them separate. When man has leisure, he has more energy. And society demands that he utilize that energy rightly, not antisocially. And the antisocial feeling is controlled, shaped by circumstances, religious, or the desire to be entertained. And this leisure is going to give man more energy, much more energy. Either he is going to lose himself in organized religions, or lose himself in entertainments of every kind, or, which is another form of entertainment, lose himself in literature, in art, in music. So that he becomes more and more superficial. He may read all the books in the world and try to understand the intricacies of thought, of theology, of certain facts and truths in literature. But it will still be an external thing. And so also, obviously, religions, entertainment. And religions assert that they are seeking more and more the inward things of life. But that those organized religions demand belief, dogma, rituals, conformity, and all the rest of it, which we all know. So, unless one is very much aware of all these conditions that are inherent in modern civilization, all our energies will be taken up by them, consumed by them, and our activity will remain very, very superficial. We shall have conflicts, we shall have various battles within ourselves, with people, with society, all the rest of it will follow. But what we're trying to say is that every form of human endeavor artistic, scientific, mathematical, or going to the office, or a relationship with one's wife and children, husband, all the rest of it, in that relationship there is conflict, there is the waste of energy. And unless one finds out the conservation of energy and what action is, our life will become more and more outward and more inwardly empty. Again, this is not a point to be discussed or doubted, or it's not my particular opinion against your opinion, but these are actual facts. So first, what is action? As it is, as we know, what is action? All our activity has subtle or obvious motive. either of reward or fear, or of gaining something. Our action is always an adjustment to a pattern, to an idea, an approximation to an ideal. That's all we know of action. Conformity, adjustment, approximation, or resistance, or denial. All that implies a series of conflicts. As we were saying the other day, to commune about something of which one is not deeply related to it, is always rather difficult. We want to commune with you about something, about a state of mind which is a complete antithesis of this conflict, inaction. We want to communicate with you about something that is total inaction, which is complete action. I want to communicate. I want to tell you something about it. Not for you to accept it. Not for you to deny or accept or be hypnotized by it. You know, one of the greatest difficulties in sitting on a platform or talking and you listening, if you do listen at all, is to establish the right relationship between the speaker and yourself. That's one of the most difficult things. Because here, we do not want to mesmerize you, hypnotize you with a lot of words, or to influence you in any way whatsoever. Or do any propaganda for an idea, or instruct you. As I pointed out, there is no teacher under taught. There is only a state of learning. And you and I cannot possibly learn if you are waiting to be instructed, to be told what to do, or be influenced. So, we are not influencing, doing any propaganda, trying to assert anything whatsoever for you to accept or reject. We are not dealing with opinions or the truth of opinions. We are just stating facts. You can observe them, look at them, or not look at them and deny them. So we both of us have to establish the right relationship so that there is a communion which is not intellectual but really a total perception of a fact which we both are looking at. It is not my point of view which you are looking, or my opinion, or my experience. I have no opinion, experience, or assertion. I'm merely pointing out. And for you, and me to look at that demands a communion of real appreciation of the fact. We are not communing with each other, but we are communing with the fact, which is entirely different. And therefore, the fact becomes much more important than you and me. And thereby, the fact alone can create the right kind of ambiance, as atmosphere, or whatever you like to call it, which will affect us profoundly. So, it seems to me that to listen to that stream, to the whisper of those trees, to listen to one's own thoughts and feelings becomes extraordinarily important when we are considering the fact and not the idea or the opinion about the fact. As we were saying, all our activity becomes or breeds conflict. We all know that. Because all our activity is based on an idea, concept, a formula. The action that approximates to an ideal must inevitably breed conflict. That's obvious. If I act according to a formula, to a pattern, to a concept, then I'm always in a state of a division between the fact and what I should do about the fact. So there is never a complete action. It's always an approximation to an idea. And hence, inherent in action, as we know it, is conflict, waste of energy, and therefore deterioration. Please observe your own mind and your own state and your own activity, and you will see this is so. Now I'm asking myself, if there is action without idea, in which there is no conflict, or to put it differently, must action always breed struggle, conflict, effort? I am talking. To me, this is action. But in that activity, there is no conflict. Because I am not trying to assert myself, be somebody, try to convince you. I am tremendously interested to find out for myself whether in action there is ever a possibility of living, doing things without the slightest effort and conflict. Because I'm very interested. I want to find out the truth, whether the mind can remain intact without deterioration, without any form of distortion. And there is bound to be distortion if there is any form of influence, if there is any form of conflict, a waste of energy. That is real interest to me, and it must be to you also. Because we are trying to find out if it is possible to live without sorrow, without despair, without fear, without any form of activity that brings about deterioration, and then find out what happens. What happens to a mind that has never been touched by society? That has no fear, that has never tasted what it is to be greedy, envious, ambitious, seeking power. And then find out, with such a mind, what is further. That's what we have to do this morning. That to become aware of our present state of mind, with all its conflicts, miseries, perversions, despairs, old age, deterioration, and the frustrations, and gather that energy which is action, for the very gathering of that energy, and that energy itself is action, which then can wipe away, cleanse the mind of all the rubbish that man has collected through centuries. So, we are not interested action for its own sake. We want to find out if there is an activity which does not breed in any form contradiction. And we see also that ideas, concepts, formulas, patterns, methods, beliefs, dogmas create the contradiction in action. So, is it possible to live without idea, without a pattern, without a concept, a belief? And it's very important to find out for oneself. Because one sees very well, love is not an idea. Love is not a pattern. Love has no concept. But we have concept, and we fit love into that concept. But in itself, you can't have a concept about love. Either you love or you don't love. So, is it possible to live in this world, going to the office, cooking, washing dishes, driving a car, doing all the daily things of life, which at present are become repetitive, which breed conflict. Is it possible to live without any ideation? And so free activity from all contradiction. I do not know if you ever walked along in a crowded street on a lonely road and looked at things without thought. Just to observe without thought, or the interference of thought. Just to observe. Though you may recognize the person, the mountain, the tree, the oncoming car, or the passing car, though you may be aware of all these things about you, yet the mind is not functioning in the usual pattern of thought. I do not know if it has ever has happened to you. Do try sometime when you are driving or when you are walking, just to look without thought. That state of activity, when the mind observes without any reaction, which breeds thought. Though you recognize the color, though you recognize the stream, the car, the goat, and the bus driver, when you so observe without thought, there is no reaction but merely observation. Then out of that so-called negative observation, that very negative observation is action. With that mind I can go to the office. A mind that is merely attentive without reaction. Because such a mind has no thought. But it can utilize knowledge in the expression of what it has to do. But it is not functioning in reaction. I wonder. So if one goes deeply into this, one finds that every form of self-centered activity, which is a reaction, from which most of us act, from the self-centered activity, thinking about ourselves, everlasting from morning till night, and functioning within that pattern, all activity is bound to lead to every form of deterioration and conflict. And when we are not functioning within that pattern, is it possible to live in this world? You may be able to live in a cave or by yourself in some mountain or the rest of it, but that too is impossible. So, is it possible to live in this world function as a total human being from this state of emptiness, if I can use that word, if you will not misunderstand the use of that word. Always preserve, always have an empty space, and through that empty space work. Whether you paint or write a poem or go to the office or talk, all action then when there is this empty space does not breed contradiction. And I think this is very important to find out for oneself. Like everything else in life, one has to find out for oneself. One cannot teach, one cannot be taught or explained. You have to find it out. You can only find it out when you know how action breeds conflict, and whether the mind is ever content with that activity. Moment it is not content, then moment it is looking, trying to find out if there is another kind of action, then you are bound to come upon this. So the question arises from that, why is it that we are always seeking satisfaction? In all our relationships, in whatever we do, there is always the desire to fulfill, which brings gratification, and remain with that gratification. And when we are discontent with things because they don't satisfy us. They don't give us pleasure, they don't give us enough prestige, fulfillment and all the rest of it. So again, this discontent breeds another series of reactions. So, seeing all this, understanding the way human beings have lived for so long, with so much confusion, misery, and never a complete action, a man who is very serious must find out for himself, it seems, that whether he can function from a mind that is uncontaminated by society, and he can only find that out if he is free from society. We are talking of freedom, of the freedom from the psychological structure of society. the psychological structure of greed, envy, ambition, pursuit of self-importance, when that psychological structure is being understood and put away, one is free of society. You may go to the office, you may still buy a pair of trousers and all the rest of it, but you are free from the psychological structure which so distorts the mind. So we come to a point when one discovers for oneself that only in complete inaction, that is, only in complete freedom from society, the structure of psychological structure of society, there is complete inaction. And that complete inaction is total action, which does not breed contradiction and therefore deterioration. I've said what I wanted to say this morning, and perhaps we can discuss that, ask questions about it. Can't one, sir? You have understood the question? Probably have not heard. Can one go to the office and keep the job without competition? Can you? So I can't say you can or you cannot, or you must, and so on. But you see what competition does. You see what it does to yourself. How it breeds not only within, but outwardly antagonism. Fear, a ruthless pursuit of one's own demands. You see all that. And you ask yourself, is it possible to live in this world without competition? That means without comparing. That means doing something which you really want to do. Or which interests you tremendously. Or being caught because you have responsibility in a job which you don't like. How to do it efficiently without comparing, without competing. To find that out, one needs a great deal of attention, doesn't one? A great deal of inward awareness of every thought, every feeling in yourself. Otherwise you are merely imposing on yourself the idea that you must not compete. Then that becomes another problem. But if you are aware of the whole implication of competition, comparing the conflict, the incessant struggle, if one is aware of that, and if you see the truth of that, where it leads man, he may have great deal of progress, he might have great deal of competitive efficiency, but it will inevitably breed antagonism, the sense of lack of affection and all the rest of it. Then if you see that, out of that perception you will act either competitively and go on with it or not at all. You can say what you like, madam, don't ask me. Je n'ai pas entendu, madame. Sorry. I'm sorry. I have not heard either of the questions. Make it very simple and brief, please. The lady says she doesn't believe that repeated activity is boring. It's all right. You know, they're finding out a man working in a factory, doing the same thing over and over and over again, is not a productive entity. So they are experimenting, of which I read about and somebody told me. In America now, they are letting the workers in certain factories learn as they go along, which is not repetitive. And therefore they are producing much more. And if you have a great deal of pleasure in something and you keep on repeating that, it becomes very routine and rather tiresome. Beg your pardon? If the artist if the artist is merely repeat, surely he ceases to be an artist, surely. Good Lord, I think we are confusing the two words, repetition and creation, aren't we? Look, sir, what is creation? What is it to be? Oh, a man who makes good shoes, a man a woman who bakes a bread, or bearing children, writing a poem, all the rest of it. Is that creation? No, don't please, just a minute. No, madam, I think we have misunderstood each other. Sorry. It's probably our English, my expression probably is not as good as it should be, and probably we don't understand what exactly we mean by emptiness. But we're talking about something which you started, which was creation. Well, I'm coming to that, madam. I'm coming to it. You know, in a university, they're teaching creative writing. Teaching creative painting. Can creative thing be taught? You can learn the technique, how to play the violin from a master. But obviously, through that technique, you can't have the genius. Please observe it for yourself. So, will technique, will add continuous practice of something bring about that creative spirit? And if one has that creative spirit, then the technique is created according to that spirit. Not the other way around. Now we think by having the technique we shall find the other. You see, we always do this. Take a very simple example, and all examples are rather defective. What is a simple life? Simple life, we say, is a man who has few clothes, eats very little, doesn't do this and doesn't do that. In Asia, one cloth, one meal, living by himself is considered a very simple life. But inwardly, he's in a turmoil, he's burning. With his desires, with his passions, with his lusts, with his ambitions. He's burning. So, to him, the simple life is the outward expression which everybody can recognize and say what a simple man he is. But inwardly, he may be in a volcanic state. And like most saints, they are outwardly very, very, very simple, but inwardly they are conforming, they are disciplining, forcing, all the rest of it. So it seems to me that simplicity is first from within, not from without. In the same way, creation cannot be sought through expression. And to be in that state of creativeness, not the expression, but to be in state of creation is one of the most, it is the discovery of the Supreme, and that can only be found when there is no activity of any kind of the self, the me. That's one question. The other is what the lady said about space. Most of us, though we are related to each other, we live in isolation. And that isolation is not what we are talking about. Emptiness is something entirely different from isolation. I must have emptiness between you and me for you to see me and me to see you. I must have space through which I can hear what you're saying and you can hear what I am saying. And equally there must be space in the mind. And not have the mind crowded with so many things that there's no space left at all. And it's only when there is space within the mind, which isn't crowded by self-centered activity, then I said it's only possible to know what it is to love, not love in isolation. That's not possible. Everything requires energy, doesn't it? To do anything, however small thing, requires energy. To get up and to go out of the tent, to think, to drive, to eat. Everything demands energy. And that energy one seeks through food, through inspiration, through reading, through disciplining. Everything demands energy. And most of us, in doing something, for most of us there is a form of resistance. There is no resistance when there is real pleasure in doing something. Or rather, something that gives us pleasure. Then there is no conflict in that energy, in that the continuity of that energy. Now, as we were saying this morning, one needs energy to be completely attentive. And that energy to be so completely attentive, in that energy there is no distraction. The moment there is a distraction, that is, you want to concentrate on something and you want at the same time to look out of the window, then there is a distraction. But the looking out of the window, as I explained the other day, is as equally important as to look, then there is no distraction, then there is no conflict. Now, do you want to go into all this? To have physical energy, you must eat the right food, must have right rest, and so on and so on. That we won't discuss. That you can experiment with yourself and find out. Now there is psychological energy. Which dissipates itself in various forms. That psychological energy seeks stimulation. The church, the football, reading literature which will stimulate it, attending meetings like this which will also stimulate you, which means that you are depending. Every form of stimulation implies dependence, whether it's a drink or LSD 25 or the speaker or going to the church. Any form of stimulation not only dulls the mind but also makes you depend. And hence that dependence is a deterioration of energy. Shall I? So, to conserve that energy, every form of dependence must disappear. And for the disappearance of that stimulation, one has to be aware of it. Whether I am dependent on my wife for my stimulation, my husband, and a book, and the office, going to a cinema, the various forms of stimulation we see. And when one becomes aware of it, either you accept those stimulations and live with it, and dissipate and deteriorate, or you become aware of those stimulations and find out their whole significance in one's life and thereby be free of them. And therefore, out of this self-awareness, not self-critical awareness, condemnation and all the rest of it, but being aware choicelessly of oneself, out of that one observes, one learns every form of influence, every form of dependence, every form of stimulation. And in that very act of learning gives you the energy to free yourself from that stimulation.